Two men in police-like uniforms stood right at my front gate, the letters HOA prominently displayed on their shirts. My heart raced wildly as I approached them, confusion clouding my thoughts. "Sir, you're in violation of HOA standards," the bald man declared, a challenging smirk spreading across his face. His partner, thin and stern, nodded in agreement. "That's impossible," I replied firmly. "I don't live in an HOA community." The bald man's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You do now," he answered, his voice ice-cold and threatening. A chill ran down my spine, but I refused to be intimidated. What I did next completely shattered their confidence and their fraudulent scheme. They never expected a simple farmer to have such powerful connections, or such devastating evidence against them. It all began on a peaceful Tuesday morning. I was sitting on my back porch, sipping coffee and savoring the warm sunlight that bathed my family's property in a golden glow. The crisp country air filled my lungs as I gazed across the 2 acres that had been in my family for generations. This land, my sanctuary, had never been part of any homeowners association. Of that fact, I was absolutely certain. The distant sound of car doors slamming disrupted my tranquil morning ritual. Curious, I set down my mug and walked around to the front of the house. There, standing at my gate with an air of unwarranted authority, were 2 strangers who would soon turn my peaceful life upside down. They wore uniforms that resembled police attire, but something felt distinctly off about them. The taller man was bald with an imposing build, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the early hour. His companion was thin and wiry, clutching a clipboard with white-knuckled intensity. His calculating gaze swept over my property, as if mentally cataloging every detail. Both men had HOA emblazoned prominently across their chests. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I called out, approaching them with measured steps. The bald man straightened his posture, attempting to appear even more intimidating. "Sir, you're in violation of HOA regulations," he declared, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Your fence is non-compliant, your mailbox doesn't meet standards, and that shed," he pointed dismissively toward my workshop, "is completely unauthorized." I felt my face flush with confusion and the first sparks of anger. "There must be some mistake," I replied, keeping my voice level. "This property isn't part of any HOA. Never has been." The thin man exchanged a knowing glance with his partner before consulting his clipboard. "According to our records, that's no longer the case," he said, his voice surprisingly high-pitched and grating. The bald man's mouth twisted into a smirk that sent an uncomfortable chill down my spine. "Your area was incorporated into the Pine Ridge HOA last week. Didn't you receive the notification?" "That's impossible," I insisted, crossing my arms defensively. "This is private property." "You can't just—" "But we can," the bald man interrupted, reaching into his jacket. He produced an official-looking folder and extracted several documents, complete with stamps and signatures that appeared remarkably legitimate. "Everything is perfectly legal. The county approved the expansion last month." My heart raced as I scanned the papers he thrust toward me. They contained legal jargon and official seals that made my head spin, but something still felt deeply wrong about the entire situation. "You have 24 hours to begin compliance measures," the thin man announced, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "After that, we'll be forced to initiate property reclamation procedures." "Reclamation?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. "You can't take my land!" The bald man's smile widened, revealing teeth too perfect to be natural. "Actually, according to Section 8(3) of the agreement, we absolutely can. Failure to comply with HOA standards after formal notification constitutes grounds for property seizure." They left me standing there, clutching those papers, as they returned to their black SUV parked at the edge of my driveway. The vehicle had no official markings, just a magnetic sign reading Pine Ridge HOA enforcement, slapped haphazardly on the door. As they drove away, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the back seat was a stack of similar folders, presumably containing the same threatening documents for my neighbors. This wasn't just about me, it was a systematic operation. I spent the next hour frantically researching online, calling the county clerk's office, and reaching out to neighbors. No one had heard anything about an HOA expansion. The clerk sounded genuinely confused when I described the documents, promising to look into it but warning that the office was understaffed and any investigation might take weeks. By evening, my kitchen table was covered with papers, my laptop screen glowing with property records and local ordinances. One thing became increasingly clear. These men weren't official representatives of any legitimate HOA. They were con artists executing an elaborate scam, and I was determined to expose them before they could victimize anyone else in our community. I couldn't sit idly by while these fraudsters threatened my home. The moment their black SUV disappeared down the road, I rushed inside and called the local county administrator's office, my fingers trembling as I dialed. After navigating through an automated system and being placed on hold twice, I finally reached someone who could help. "No, sir," the clerk said firmly after checking their records. "There is absolutely no homeowners association registered under the name Pine Ridges in this county, and there certainly haven't been any approved HOA boundary expansions in your area in the past 6 months." My suspicions confirmed, I hung up and immediately called Sheriff Thompson, who had been a friend of my father's. He listened patiently to my story, but sounded skeptical. "Impersonating officials is serious, James," he said. "But without more evidence than just your word against theirs, there's not much I can do officially. These scammers are getting sophisticated. They target rural areas where neighbors are spread out and don't communicate regularly." "So you've heard of this happening before?" I asked, pacing my kitchen floor. "Similar cases in Westbrook County last year," he replied. "They'd pressure homeowners into paying fake violation fees or signing over property rights. By the time anyone realized what was happening, they'd vanish only to appear in another county with a different HOA name." Sheriff Thompson promised to drive by later that afternoon, but warned me not to confront the men if they returned. "Document everything," he advised. "Take photos, record conversations if you legally can, and alert your neighbors." I spent the rest of the day doing exactly that, calling every property owner within a 3-mile radius, many of whom I'd known my entire life. Most hadn't been visited yet, but elderly Miss S. Abernathy mentioned 2 men in uniforms had stopped by her farm the previous day, leaving a notice about compliance issues and a $450 fine for her non-regulation fence posts. Sleep evaded me that night as I formulated a plan to expose these criminals. I finally drifted off around 3 a.m., only to be jolted awake 3 hours later by the unmistakable roar of heavy machinery. Disoriented and alarmed, I stumbled out of bed and rushed to my front window. What I saw made my blood run cold. A yellow bulldozer was already tearing up my gravel driveway, its metal treads leaving deep gouges in the earth my grandfather had once tilled. Workers in fluorescent vests were placing stakes around my property, marking boundaries with bright orange spray paint. And there, standing like generals surveying a battlefield, were the 2 imposters from yesterday, the bald man barking orders, while his thin accomplice made notes on his ever-present clipboard. I burst through my front door, not bothering with shoes or a proper shirt. "Stop this immediately," I shouted, running toward the bulldozer operator. This is private property. You're trespassing. The operator, a young man who looked barely out of his teens, hesitated and glanced toward the bald man for instructions. That brief moment of uncertainty told me everything I needed to know. These workers had been hired under false pretenses. The bald man strode toward me with practiced confidence, sunglasses already in place despite the early hour. "Mr. Harrison," he called out, using my surname though I'd never introduced myself. "We discussed this yesterday. Your property requires significant modifications to meet community standards." "There is no community standard because there is no HOA, I shouted, aware that my neighbors might hear the commotion. "Good. I wanted witnesses. I've already confirmed with the county office. Pine Ridge HOA doesn't exist." For just a moment, I caught a flicker of concern cross the bald man's face before his practiced smile returned. He reached into his jacket and produced another official-looking document. "This is an enforcement order," he stated calmly, as though explaining something simple to a child. "Your non-compliance has escalated to a legal matter." I snatched the paper from his hands, scanning it quickly. The document appeared legitimate at first glance: county letterhead, official stamps, even a judge's signature. But having spent hours researching the previous night, I immediately spotted several inconsistencies. The county seal was slightly off-center, the judge's name was misspelled, and the citation referenced statutes that didn't exist in our state code. "This is forged," I declared, looking him directly in the eyes. "And I've already spoken with Sheriff Thompson about you and your operation." At the mention of law enforcement, the thin man stepped forward nervously. "Mark," he whispered urgently to his partner, "maybe we should quiet." The bald man Mark snapped, never taking his eyes off me. His confident demeanor had hardened into something more dangerous. "Mr. Harrison, obstructing an official HOA renovation is grounds for immediate property seizure. I suggest you return to your home while we continue our work." I stood my ground, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "The workers need to leave now," I said loudly, addressing the confused-looking crew. "These men are not officials. They're running a scam, and you're all unwitting accomplices to property damage and fraud." Several workers exchanged uneasy glances. The bulldozer operator killed his engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tension. Mark's face flushed with anger. "Start that machine back up right now." He barked at the operator, who hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. That's when I played my trump card. I pulled out my phone and held it up, the camera clearly recording. "I've been live streaming this entire confrontation to the county sheriff's office." I lied smoothly. "They're on their way now. And this isn't the only recording I have." The thin man visibly paled. "Mark, we need to go," he insisted, already backing toward their vehicle. But Mark wasn't ready to surrender. He stepped closer to me, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. This isn't just about your pathetic little farm. We have connections that can make your life very difficult." Before I could respond, the distant wail of a police siren cut through the morning air. Sheriff Thompson had perfect timing, though I knew it was just coincidence. He was simply following through on his promise to drive by. The effect was immediate. The thin man bolted for their SUV, while Mark lingered just long enough to issue one final threat. "This isn't over, Harrison." Not by a long shot. As they peeled away, kicking up gravel and dust, I turned to address the bewildered workers. They deserved to know the truth about who had hired them, and I needed allies for what I suspected would be a much bigger fight ahead. The moment the fraudster's SUV disappeared around the bend, I knew they would return, and next time, they'd come prepared for resistance. This wasn't just about bogus HOA violations anymore. The threat in Mark's eyes had been unmistakable. These people were dangerous, and I needed someone who understood danger. I retreated to my house, hands still trembling slightly as I pulled out my phone. There was only one person I could trust with this situation, someone who had faced far worse threats than fraudulent property scammers. I dialed a number I rarely used but had never deleted. "Jake?" "It's James Harrison," the first said when he answered on the second ring. "You got a minute?" The line went silent for a moment before Jake's gravelly voice responded. "Harrison? Been, what, 3 years?" Despite the casual greeting, I could hear the immediate shift in his tone, the recognition that I wouldn't be calling without good reason. "Listen, I've got a situation here," I explained, keeping my voice steady as I detailed the events of the past 2 days. Jake listened without interruption, only occasionally grunting in acknowledgement. Jake Mercer and I had grown up together on neighboring properties, but our paths had diverged dramatically after high school. While I took over the family farm, Jake had enlisted and eventually became a Special Forces sniper with 3 tours overseas. He'd returned to civilian life 5 years ago, settling in a cabin about 20 miles from town, mostly keeping to himself, except for occasional fishing trips we'd take together. "You free tomorrow morning?" I finally asked. "I have a feeling these guys are coming back, and I'd rather not face them alone." There was no hesitation in his response. "I'll handle it," he said simply. "Be there before sunrise." True to his word, Jake's weathered pickup truck rolled silently into my driveway at 5:15 the next morning. He emerged wearing faded jeans and a dark jacket, his military cropped hair now peppered with gray. Without a word, he surveyed the property with the calculating gaze of someone assessing tactical positions. "They'll come from the main road," he said matter-of-factly. "You said they've been showing up around 7?" I nodded, pouring him a cup of coffee. "What's the plan?" Jake sipped the coffee, his expression unreadable. "You confront them normally." "I'll be watching. Sometimes just knowing someone's got eyes on you is enough to make people reconsider their choices." He paused, fixing me with a serious look. "These aren't just scammers, James. The equipment, the forged documents, the coordinated approach, this is organized. They've done this before." By 6:30, Jake had disappeared into the tree line at the edge of my property with his high-powered spotting scope, a remnant from his military days. I paced nervously on the porch, rehearsing what I would say when the fraudsters returned. At precisely 7:12 a.m., the now familiar black SUV appeared at the end of my driveway. This time, however, it was followed by a second identical vehicle. My stomach tightened as both cars parked and doors began opening. Mark, the bald leader, emerged first, his sunglasses already in place despite the overcast morning. His thin accomplice followed, clutching his clipboard like a shield. But now they were joined by 4 burly men in matching HOA enforcement uniforms, each one looking more like a nightclub bouncer than any legitimate official. I descended my porch steps slowly, deliberately, stopping at the edge of the gravel where my driveway had been partially destroyed yesterday. The workers Sheriff Thompson had scared away had left behind their equipment, which now sat like abandoned toys in the mud. "Mr. Harrison," Mark called out, his voice carrying an artificial pleasantness that didn't match his rigid posture. "I hope you've reconsidered your position since yesterday's misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I replied evenly, keeping my hands visible at my sides. "You're running a scam, and I've already filed reports with the Sheriff's Department and the FBI's Real Estate Fraud Division." Mark's smile tightened, but he maintained his composure. "You're making a serious mistake," he said, stepping forward while his four enforcers spread out slightly behind him. "We have authorization to proceed with property modifications, with or without your cooperation." "Not on my land," I stated firmly, standing my ground. Mark's artificial smile vanished completely. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "This isn't just about your pathetic little farm anymore. We have operations across 3 counties. People who interfere tend to experience unfortunate accidents." As he spoke, one of the larger men began moving toward the equipment they'd left behind, clearly intending to resume yesterday's destruction. Another reached beneath his jacket, the gesture unmistakably suggesting a concealed weapon. My heart hammered in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Mark laughed a cold, humorless sound. "And why's that?" The answer came not from me, but in the form of a small red dot that suddenly appeared on Mark's forehead. The laser sight was unmistakable, its crimson point unwavering as it centered directly between his eyebrows. The effect was instantaneous. Mark's arrogant expression crumbled, replaced by naked fear as he realized what the red dot signified. His eyes darted frantically from side to side, searching for the source, but Jake was too well concealed. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get back in your vehicles and leave my property," I said, my voice steady and cold. My friend doesn't miss. One of the enforcers, the one who had been reaching under his jacket, froze, his hand still halfway to whatever weapon he carried. Another dropped the sledgehammer he'd picked up, the heavy tool landing with a dull thud in the soft earth. "This is insane," Mark stammered, sweat now visibly beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "You can't—" "20 seconds," I interrupted, not breaking eye contact. The thin man with the clipboard was already backing toward their vehicle. "Mark," he hissed urgently, "we need to go, now." For a moment, Mark seemed torn between his fear and his unwillingness to surrender. The red dot never wavered from his forehead, a silent promise from an unseen guardian. "This isn't over," he finally spat, his voice trembling despite his attempt at bravado. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Neither do you," I replied calmly. Mark barked orders at his men, and they quickly retreated to their vehicles. The SUV's engines roared to life, tires spinning in the mud as they hastily reversed down my driveway. Within moments, they had disappeared, leaving behind only tire tracks and the abandoned construction equipment. Only when the sound of their engines had completely faded did Jake emerge from the tree line, his rifle equipped with nothing more dangerous than a laser pointer resting casually against his shoulder. "They'll be back," he said matter-of-factly, coming to stand beside me. "And next time they'll come prepared for resistance." I nodded grimly. "Then we'd better be prepared too." The moment Jake and I watched those black SUVs disappear down my driveway, I knew we had to act quickly. This brief victory wouldn't last long. Men like Mark didn't retreat permanently. They regrouped. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sheriff Thompson's number with steady fingers, my resolve hardening with each ring. "They were just here again, Sheriff," I explained when he answered. This time with muscle and implied threats. I described the confrontation in detail, emphasizing the escalation from mere fraud to outright intimidation. "I've got everything on video," I added, gesturing toward the security cameras I'd hastily installed after their first visit. Sheriff Thompson arrived within 30 minutes, his cruiser kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop beside Jake's pickup. His expression was grim as he reviewed the security footage on my laptop, occasionally pausing to take notes or ask clarifying questions. The cameras had captured everything: the threatening postures, Mark's explicit warnings, even the moment when one of his enforcers had reached for what was almost certainly a concealed weapon. "This changes things," Thompson said, his weathered face serious as he studied the forged documents I'd collected. "This isn't just fraud anymore, it's criminal conspiracy, intimidation, and potentially assault." He pointed to inconsistencies in the paperwork that even I hadn't noticed. "They've been sloppy here. These documents have the same mistakes I've seen in cases over in Westbrook County." What happened next unfolded with surprising speed. Sheriff Thompson forwarded my evidence to the FBI's Real Estate Fraud Division, who revealed they'd been building a case against a sophisticated ring of property scammers operating throughout the region. My evidence, particularly the clear video footage of the ringleaders, provided the final pieces they needed. 3 days later, while Jake and I were reinforcing my property's security measures, Sheriff Thompson's cruiser appeared again, this time with news that sent a wave of relief washing over me. "We got them," he announced, unable to suppress a satisfied smile. "FBI raided their operations center this morning, caught your bald friend and his skinny sidekick with a trove of forged documents, fake seals, and records of dozens of previous scams." As if to punctuate his statement, a tow truck rumbled past my property, hauling away the abandoned construction equipment. Behind it, another truck carried the now familiar black SUV, impounded as evidence. "They've been running this scheme across 3 states," Thompson continued, accepting the coffee I offered, "targeting rural properties, especially those owned by elderly folks or people they thought wouldn't fight back." He gave me an approving nod. "You were the first to stand your ground effectively." Despite this victory, a lingering unease settled in my stomach as I watched the tow trucks disappear down the road. Men like Mark rarely operated alone. They had connections, partners, perhaps even more dangerous associates who remained at large. That evening, as sunset painted my fields in amber and gold, I called Jake again. "They got the frontman," I told him, "but I can't shake the feeling this isn't completely over." Jake's response was characteristically direct. "It rarely is. Keep your eyes open, cameras running, and my number handy." I nodded to myself, scanning the darkening tree line of my property. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but vigilance would remain my constant companion in the quiet countryside I called home. What do you think about this story? Have you ever encountered a fraudulent HOA or similar scammers targeting your property? The tactics these criminals use continue to evolve, making vigilance essential for all homeowners. If you've faced similar situations, please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help others recognize and avoid these dangerous schemes. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling true stories of ordinary people standing up against extraordinary threats. Hit that notification bell to stay updated on new episodes released every Friday. Remember, knowledge is your best defense against those who would exploit your hard-earned property.